Have you heard of the TikTok money glitch trend? Maybe you've heard something about how people were initially really excited about participating in it and how now it's wrecking lives.
The new viral TikTok trend that some users are calling a money glitch or free money hack, it's actually having some serious consequences. Here's what it is. It involves people depositing fraudulent checks into their Chase bank accounts and withdrawing the money before it's flagged. Well, that's actually fraud.
Videos posted to the app show people getting so-called free cash from Chase ATMs by depositing checks made out to themselves for large sums of money. They then withdraw as much as they can without exceeding that sum, leading them to believe that they had tricked the system. Chase says this glitch is actually a form of criminal check fraud. It centers on a common banking practice that allows check depositors to have access to a portion of all of their money before the check actually clears. The bank says the issue has been addressed and warns people not to try it. Experts say when it comes to bank glitches, it's not your money, and when the bank figures out what is going on, they're going to want it back.
Imagine for a second checking your bank account and seeing a massive negative balance. $11,000, $40,000, or even more just gone. This is not a harmless trend. It's real life check fraud, and people are starting to find out the consequences. But people might not know that this can end up with people spending as much as 30 years in prison, depending on the circumstances. So in this video, we're going to talk about what happened with this trend, why it took off, and what could be waiting for people who participated. Let's get into it. Okay, so to start off, what happened here? The so-called money glitch trend was something that showed up on TikTok a couple weekends ago. In it, people were encouraged to deposit big numbered checks through their bank's app, particularly Chase Bank. Then they would rush to withdraw the money from an ATM before the check clears. The idea was that people seemed to think that there was some kind of free money that they would get with this quote-unquote glitch. And so there were a bunch of people who were choosing to line up at Chase Bank ATMs, seemingly looking for an easy payday. But if you understand how the banks work, you understand that there's simply no such thing. And now these people are discovering that their accounts are frozen, they have massive negative balances that are piling up, and they're wondering how things went so wrong.
Fuck, man. They really told me to tap in. Next day I was supposed to clear and look at my account, yo. Bro, what the?
Now look, I understand. It's been tough out there recently. Inflation has gone crazy all around the world, and prices have gone way up on everything from the gas that people need to fill up their cars to a simple gallon of milk to have a decent breakfast in the morning. So it's easy to see why a trend like this can take off so quickly, especially at a time like this when most people are probably feeling that increasing pressure of inflation. And on top of that anxiety, or maybe even desperation in some cases, there's something about the allure of free money and seeing people on TikTok claiming that they're withdrawing a free $20,000, $30,000, even $90,000 in some cases in cash. That can be really tempting for just about anyone. But now, after this wave of euphoric videos of people on TikTok withdrawing these insane amounts, now we have a new wave of stories of accounts being wiped out and frozen. Chase Bank is apparently locking people out of their accounts with negative balances that are 5 figures or more. And so before these people are able to go back and use their accounts again, they're going to need to, at a minimum, pay back those negative balances to the bank. And in the meantime, these people probably still have other very real bills to pay. I mean, I'm just thinking about how at some point their rent is going to be due, or they may have student loans or credit card bills or a car payment that need to be taken care of. And this can have a whole cascade of financial impact on these people who fell for this whole essentially scam. And the thing is, the videos of these people showing their massive negative balances, these really aren't isolated incidents. The bank was always going to catch up and notice at some point that the check that was deposited didn't actually have any real payment behind it. And the thing is, that's just the financial impact. Let's talk about what might be coming legally for these people. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is people taking money from the bank that isn't theirs. Essentially, this is bank fraud. And with that, these people have some criminal charges to potentially worry about. First off, let me explain that in the United States, probably every single state and territory has its own criminal code statute for bank fraud. So that means that whatever state this individual is in when they take out this money from an ATM, they can face state criminal charges. And on top of that, there's also a federal bank fraud statute that can also nab these people. And so one person can actually be looking at both state and federal charges at the same time. As an example, let's look at California law. Specifically, California Penal Code Section 476A covers where a person passes a check that bounces because there's no money behind it. Under this law, a person can be charged with either a felony or a misdemeanor. With a misdemeanor conviction, a person can end up spending up to 1 year in county jail. With a felony conviction, though, someone can end up spending up to 3 years in county jail. But in order to get there, here's what prosecutors would have to show. First, they have to prove that the defendant or their agent made, drew, uttered, or delivered a check. Second, they have to show that the defendant acted willfully with the intent to defraud. This is important, and in a second we'll talk about some possible defenses. A lot of them center on this particular point. But anyway, the third element prosecutors have to prove is that at the time that the checks were made, drawn, uttered, or delivered, there was insufficient funds to pay the check amount in full. And finally, prosecutors have to show that the defendant knew of the insufficiency of the funds when they drew, made, uttered, or delivered the check. So let's look at these elements in relation to the people who participated in the TikTok money glitch trend. First, the trend involved someone drawing a check to their personal account that was insufficient at the time they were depositing it. That's kind of the whole point of this whole money glitch trend. So elements 1 and 3 here are pretty easily met here. And when we look at that fourth element, which is the defendant knowing those funds were insufficient, that's why they thought it was a glitch, right? It was some kind of, quote, free money because it wasn't money that they actually had in their account. So elements 1, 3, and 4, just by nature of participating in the trend itself, you have a pretty easy time proving those 3 elements. But now we have to look at element number 2. Did the trend participant act willfully with the intent to defraud the bank? First off, what exactly does it mean to specifically intend to defraud? Well, it means that you have to have a specific aim to achieve a certain end. And that end of defrauding is to intentionally use dishonest means to deprive another person of their property or to imperil their rights or interests. So in other words, you know that something belongs to someone else and you use some kind of deception or trick or basically dishonesty so that you can take it for yourself. So looking back at element number 2 here, are these people intending to defraud Chase Bank by participating in the money glitch trend? Keep in mind, this element is all about someone's mental state. You have to ask what is going on inside their brain in deciding to do what they're trying to do here. And when it comes to proving any kind of a case, elements of mental state are generally the hardest to prove for any kind of a crime because you have to use things like what the defendant said or maybe other circumstances like what was communicated to the defendant right before they decided to act or other circumstances that were going on around them at the time. So maybe a good question to ask for this particular element is, what about this money glitch trend was prompting these people to act on it? Did people think that there was just some fairy godmother that was giving this money out? Did they think the Chase Bank was just voluntarily giving this money out of its own sense of generosity? Or did they think that this money was just like appearing out of nowhere and it didn't belong to anyone at all before they themselves claimed it? These are all possibilities. But when you think about the fact that people were participating in a money glitch trend, I can't help but think about the fact that there's that word, glitch. Everyone has some understanding of what the word glitch means. It's a mistake. It's a malfunction. It's the instance where something is temporarily going wrong and causing something to happen that normally shouldn't happen. So if people have an understanding of the word glitch, they probably have some kind of idea that what's going on here is not something that's really supposed to happen. And people who rushed out to take advantage of the so-called glitch had to have known that this was not something that was going to be around forever. Now, are there naive people out there who are going to think that free money exists and it's not owned by anyone until it's like claimed by someone in this kind of a way? Yes. Absolutely. There undoubtedly are people that are that naive. In fact, just about everyone probably harbors some level of naivety at some point in their lives because they've let their guard down for a moment, or maybe a little bit longer than a moment. But thinking about this realistically, a significant number of these people who partook in the challenge very likely understood that they were taking money out of the bank that belonged to someone. And that someone was not them. And as I said, proving mental state is generally very difficult. Unless, of course, someone decided to upload a video to TikTok talking about what they were thinking in the moments surrounding this withdrawal. Yes, this entire trend is essentially self-snitching, with of course the asterisk that it seems like at least some of these videos might not actually be real. After all, there's this one that appears to show fake bills used as props for movies, so I don't really know what to do with that one. But anyway, I would venture to guess that at least some of these videos are real, and for those real videos, those can absolutely be used as evidence in criminal cases against these people. And that's true even if they delete them, because TikTok undoubtedly keeps some kind of copy of these videos on some server somewhere. And so in California, this can put someone in jail for up to 3 years. But while a person in California can get prosecuted under California law, guess what? They can also get prosecuted under federal law as well. And that's where we get into some very significant punishments potentially. It's under 18 U.S. Code Section 1344, the federal bank fraud statute. Here, the prosecutors need to show the following. First, federal prosecutors have to show that there was a scheme to defraud a financial institution. And second, they have to show that the defendant either knowingly executed or knowingly attempted to execute the scheme with the intent to defraud. The fact that this was a known trend on TikTok seems to suggest we do in fact have a scheme here. And so was this a scheme to defraud Chase Bank? To me personally, it certainly seems like it. But then you have the same mental state element here as what I talked about under California law. So the analysis is actually going to be very similar between these two. But the difference here is in the punishment. Whereas under California law, we're talking about a maximum of 3 years in prison. Under federal law, we're talking about up to 30 years in federal prison and a possible penalty of up to $1 million.
$1 million.
And when I say $1 million, I am not talking about the amount that the person has to pay back to the bank for the overdraft that they took. Those negative balances that you see on these TikToks, they already have to pay that back. But then with this federal statute, they may have to pay an additional penalty on top of that. And that penalty can be up to $1 million. Now, what would determine how much time actually someone spends in prison and how much they would have to pay in terms of a penalty does depend on a number of factors. There's whether they have a criminal history, whether they've done anything like this before, whether they have some kind of professional background maybe that shows that they should have known better, and probably also the amount that they withdrew, among other factors. Now, okay, to what extent was this really bank fraud? And to what extent were people participating in the trend because they were naive, they got duped, they made some kind of a mistake? Well, there are some defenses to a charge of bank fraud. After all, writing a check that bounces is a much more common event than getting prosecuted for doing so. For example, there's the defense of a mistaken belief or a lack of knowledge. Let's say you made some kind of a clerical or mathematical error when you were deciding how much to withdraw from your account and you really believed that you had enough to cover those funds. Or maybe someone paid you with a bad check and you had a good faith belief that that check was actually good, that there was money behind it, and that when you withdrew the funds, that there would be plenty of money there to cover the withdrawal. That is a possible defense in a situation where there is a bounced check. Another defense is something like overdraft protection. This is something that many people will have. In a lot of cases, it protects a person from an accusation of bank fraud in case they do, in fact, overdraft their account. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's where you have a checking account and it's linked up to, say, a savings account. And if you take too much money out of your checking account, the bank just takes the rest of what you withdrew from your savings, usually with some kind of an overdraft protection fee. But let's say you wrote a check and you assumed that you had enough between your checking and your savings account to cover it, but it turns out that you didn't. You could try to make the argument that you had a good faith belief that it would be covered with overdraft protection. But keep in mind, this is also going to depend on some factors, like how much you withdrew versus how much you had in the account, for example. If you knew you only had $2,000 in your checking and savings, and maybe you've never really had anything more than that in any given time in the history of your entire account, it's hard to argue that you assumed that overdraft protection would cover you if you took out, say, $30,000. Now, there also are a couple defenses related to more of what the defendant may have communicated to whoever they were giving the check to. Specifically, did they do something like communicate to the person or the bank that they're writing the check right now, but warning them not to deposit the check just yet because they need time for those funds to clear? If they communicated that much, it shows that they weren't really intending to defraud anyone. Rather, it shows that they're actually actually being very upfront about the fact that the funds weren't there to cover the check yet. So this could be shown through things like a post-dated check or maybe some kind of statements to the recipient like, hey, this check won't clear until next week, or hey, this money isn't in my account yet. Double check with me first before you deposit it to make sure it's there. And finally, there's another defense related to communications with the police. And this is because, remember, the hardest element to prove is mental state of the defendant. So where defendants spill their guts to someone about their mental state, that's sometimes going to be the most powerful evidence against the defendant. But where those statements were made to the police, a good defense attorney is going to do an analysis to see if there was a violation of someone's rights under Miranda.
Do you even know the Miranda rights?
Yes.
You're probably familiar with Miranda warnings or Miranda violations. These have to do with certain warnings that the police have to give to a person who is A, in police custody, and B, being interrogated by the police.
Go ahead. It's 4 declamatory sentences followed by a question for a total of 57 words.
Okay. Look, it obviously starts with you have the right to remain silent. I know you've heard this before. And then, I think it sounds something like, well, the thing, right. You have the right to remain an attorney.
Did you say that you have the right to be an attorney?
You did?
And so if a person finds themselves under both of those circumstances and the police did not give their Miranda warnings, they can make the world's most incriminating statements and they can't be used against the defendant.
The department was forced to drop the charges because you forgot to read him his Miranda rights. What possible reason is there for not doing the only thing you have to do when arresting someone?
Essentially what happens is the police, the prosecutors, they kind of have to just kind of pretend that those statements don't exist. Anyway, those are some potential defenses to a bank fraud charge. But do those apply in this particular case? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Personally, I think that where there is evidence that someone drew these huge amounts from their account to participate in this TikTok trend, it's going to be really hard for them to argue most or any of these defenses. Banks are likely to point at, first of all, the timing of these withdrawals lining up with the TikTok trend itself. Then if people are posting videos of themselves withdrawing the money or showing their negative balances, these are potentially self-snitching statements, and even deleting them might not be enough to make them go away. This is because prosecutors can subpoena TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, wherever the defendant has posted this. And there's a really good chance that the social media platform is going to comply with that subpoena. So considering everything, how are the banks responding to this whole trend? Well, for one thing, it looks like Chase Bank is changing the way that they operate their check to withdrawal process. And also, they're unsurprisingly clawing back all of that money that has been wrongfully withdrawn. They've also put like 7-day holds on a lot of these accounts, and once those checks officially bounce, they are bound to go after the people who participated in the trend. And it surely won't be long before law enforcement comes around and starts knocking on some doors as well. So the way I see it, this is all really, really unfortunate. Like I said before, there's a good chance that there are some people who truly were naive about this whole thing. These are people who maybe didn't stop to think about what was really happening here or where this money was coming from, and they didn't really intend to defraud the likes of Chase Bank. These people might be able to fight these fraud charges because prosecutors have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that these people actually specifically intended to defraud the bank. But how much would a jury or a judge believe that? I don't know. And anyway, I would suspect that a vast majority of these people who participated thought that they were finding themselves in a position to take advantage of an institution that was maybe too big to notice this glitch and thought that they could get away with like tricking the bank. In which case, the law of FIFO totally applies here.
See, as you can see, the more you around, the more you're going to find out.
But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Should these people be given some grace here? Or do you think that they totally deserve criminal charges that might be coming their way soon? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more coverage of crazy cases and interesting legal topics, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out there. And if you're really enjoying the content and you want to know how to best support the channel, consider becoming a member of Byte Club. You can join either through YouTube memberships or by becoming a supporter on Patreon. Links to both are in the description below. Otherwise, see you in the next video.